In this edition of Issues and Insiders, we meet with a British art gallery's first Korean director who speaks about widening connections via works of art beyond borders. Hello and welcome to this edition of Issues and Insiders. I'm Min Sun-hee. Art, pundits say, knows no boundaries. And that being said, today I speak with the Korean director of a British art gallery who has pledged to widen global connections. I have Director Lee Sook-kyung at the Whitworth live on the line. Director Lee, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Right, Director Lee, let's begin then with some details about the art gallery, the Whitworth in Manchester.
Yes, it was built and established in 1889 in memory of an industrialist from Manchester who is Sir Joseph Whitworth, and it's part of a University of Manchester as a convening space between the university and the people of the city. So the people's interest and gratification of art and access to art have always been the key element for this very public institution. The collection is actually very interesting too. It holds more than 62,000 objects, and from works of art, textiles and wallpapers, and very well-known prints collection and works on paper. It really spans big time period from about 2,000 years from now and to the present, and very historic to very contemporary, and also some fine art, but as well as decorative art. So I would say it really, the range and scope of the collection is there to meet many different tastes and many different interests of the people of Manchester with many different cultural backgrounds.
Right, that is impressive. Director Lee, what are your thoughts about being the first Korean director of the Whitworth?
I suppose it's really a great opportunity to bring different perspectives, because one culture has deep connections with certain parts of different civilizations, but I bring slightly different perspectives from perhaps British born and British educated person. And Manchester has always been an international place. So I think my perspective as more of a global person between cultures will bring something quite specific, but also very new.
Right, something to look forward to for sure then. Director Lee, could you tell us a bit about your journey into your profession as an art director?
Yes, I studied art history and theory in Seoul at Hongik University for my bachelor's and master's degrees. And then I moved to London to study further. And while working as a curator at the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art. So working as curator really gave me a different perspectives to study art history and theory. And I think it gave me this very solid ground to understand where history of art connect with different parts of cultural sort of landscape. And obviously this increasing change in globalization and also mixing of cultures and understanding different and hybrid cultures really gave me a good background to bring my own experience to this curating contemporary art, but also working as an international curator to connect different cultures and really making those bridges to understand what seems to be quite sort of conflicting sometimes, but also different boundaries.
Director Lee, was there a reason why you chose to go to the UK to further your interest in the field of art instead of any other country that you could have chosen to go to?
It was a little bit opportunistic because I received British Council Fellowship. And also I was curating a British contemporary art exhibition for the museum at the time. So 1 year of sabbatical leave with sort of this aim of understanding the current practice of British art at the time. Really, that was the reason for me to come to Britain, but it also gave me a very good realization that my understanding of art, and especially sort of international art, was in a way quite limited. And I wanted to really expand my vision and understanding by staying and studying in the UK, where academic traditions were very open. And also I felt that at the time, the British art was really taking an interesting shape on an international level.
Right. So from the academic arena there, you move into the work arena. We often speak about the glass ceiling for women in the workforce, Director Lee. I'm sure you've heard of that as well. What have been some of the challenges, do you think, that you faced as an Asian woman in the world of art in Europe?
I would say in Europe, perhaps women have less problem of these problems than other industries, but still ethnic, racial, cultural, and all these differences are difficult sort of challenges sometimes for people working as professionals. And although things are improving, I would say these things are quite well connected, interconnected in some ways. So my aim as a curator was really to balance art history with global perspective rather than North American or Western Europe-centric ones. And I suppose my personal journey as a curator and a professional in art field was also quite similar in balancing these different experiences and making less hierarchical and more horizontal and more equal and less prejudiced ways to share our own expertise, but also understanding others' perspectives too.
Right. Director Lee, upon being tapped as the director of the Whitworth, you spoke with, I believe, the BBC, where you talked about widening the Whitworth's global connections. Do you care to elaborate?
Sure. Really to retrace Manchester's international history and network was the aim when I was talking about that. And I continue this effort in building more partnerships for exhibition making, but also commissioning new artworks and working with more international artists. So touring the collection is one part I'm really working on at the moment, and presenting artists from across the world is really important because we tend to think that our experiences in different parts of the world may be quite different from each other, but we share many similarities and sensibilities that can be understood from very human perspective as well.
And perhaps because of this similarity, Director Lee, there has been a growing interest in Korean art on the global stage, that is. What can you tell us about Europe's interest in Korea's works of art over the past years?
I think it's been real great interest has been arising, and it's from everywhere. And I'm very happy to see the interests are both in historic, but also contemporary art and cultures. And obviously a lot of contemporary art exhibitions of solo and group exhibitions in nature have been presented by major and very important museums and galleries across the world. And I would say somewhere like Venice Biennial, which is opening very soon this month in Italy, have been a good platform for presenting Korean art. And now it is actually celebrating its 30th year in Venice as one of the newest sort of pavilions, national pavilions.
Right, I see. And hopefully Korean art will take a big part there as well. Director Lee, how do you explain perhaps Korea's growing presence in the global art scene in recent years?
Yeah, I think it's been a real interesting time, and I would say it's a reflection of economic power, but also geopolitical sort of shift. And we have been, Korean art and culture have been at the forefront of kind of soft power policy of the nation as well. And Korean culture in general is really attracting huge interest from particularly young people across the world, and pop culture included, and cinema, but also dramas. And I suppose art is also understood as a tool and also the mirror that really reflects the current situations and very relevant stories that a lot of people share across the globe.
Director Lee, you also served as the artistic director of the 14th Gwangju Biennale that was last year. And that being said, what efforts do you believe are perhaps necessary to further expand Korea's global appeal with regard to art, of course?
Yeah, I think these biennials in Korea have very important roles to play. And especially in Gwangju, it's a really interesting history of origin, how it became a biennial that really attract a lot of interest from international peers. And I think overcoming political trauma like Gwangju Uprising through artistic event and cultural sort of event like biennial was a good idea to show how sort of Korean artistic traditions are so solid and also historically bounded. And I guess the strengthening key events like Gwangju and other long-standing biennials would be a good way to ensure these platforms that are well known and also well respected in the international art field would be a good way to continue this interest. But also, I would say these global standings and profiles are difficult to establish. So once we establish it, to nourish and to also strengthen these kind of opportunities and platforms to continue that type of engagement would be an interesting way to forward.
Right. Director Lee, I understand you'll be hosting lectures on transcultural curating at the University of Manchester as well. What would you say are perhaps some of the very basic factors to consider when curating works of art, especially for an international audience?
I would say as sort of people living in this planet at this time, our issues are very much shared, like climate emergency and also wars and conflict in many different parts of the world. Art is really also beyond national or cultural boundaries, and artists work in many hybrid ways and interconnected ways, and art can really address and also propose different ways to understand our situations and perhaps inspire us to come up with some solutions for the crisis we share to be solved. And I would say really art can be this connector or the interconnection between different people and the time. And across time as well, it's not just about the kind of geopolitical boundaries that art can cross, but also it can show how interconnected our issues, current issues, might be with historic ones, and perhaps give us some sort of lessons from historic understanding of artistic practices too.
Right, but connecting the past to the present and perhaps even to the future then. Director Lee, we have a bit of time, which is why I'd like to ask you a question or two about Korean young artists. We have quite a growing pool of Korean artists. Also in that pool are Korean celebrities as well. If I were to ask you, and I understand this might be a tough question, but is there a certain characteristic of modern Korean art that makes it Korean, do you think?
I'm sure there are a lot of different answers, but my personal sort of perspective and observation is that Korean artists are very much conscious of what's happening around Korea and in the world. Some sort of national traits of particular sort of artistic practices of now may be different, but what I could say as a sort of generation and as a sort of national kind of tendencies. I would say Korean artists are very international in their outlook and very diligent in presenting their work and also trying to communicate with the larger and wider audiences, including international audiences.
All right, you've spoken quite a bit about seeking to create a connection with audiences. And that being said, and also based on what you spoke earlier about with regard to bringing perhaps a new perspective to the Whitworth, could you give us perhaps an example of some of the different perspectives that you seek to bring to the art gallery in Manchester, as a director, of course?
Of course, and I mean, as an institution that needs to really mediate artists and audiences and presenting art for the benefit of the public, I think it's very important to think about the audience at the center. What I'm really trying to do with an institution with such history and also impact in the city like Manchester, it's really important for me to think about the locality of our audiences, but also how it can be presenting much wider stories about human experiences as well. So very specific local, but also quite open to the whole globe.
Which will be quite an ambitious task. Finally, Director Lee, do share with us some of your plans at the Whitworth this particular year.
Sure. We have a really interesting program of diverse British artist shows this year with Trinidad-born John Lyons, painter and poet, showing his largest survey exhibition retrospective in May. And we also have really interesting artist using drawing as her main medium, but also working with portrait in a genre that has very historic, but also sort of racially driven kind of perspective, and who is Barbara Walker. And that will be also her largest UK survey exhibition of her work to date. And with new sort of perspectives of showing more international artists, I'm bringing a Thai artist for the first time to the Whitworth, Chakai Sibuter, who uses textile to talk about and think about refugee issues in a place like Thailand, and that also resonates with a lot of migrant families living in Manchester.
Right, surely a universal message right there. I hope you get to work with a number of Korean artists as well in the future, Director Lee. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today.
Thank you for having me.
Right, well, that ends this edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching, and be sure to join us again same time tomorrow.